1936, Monte Carlo, a magnificent villa on the Mediterranean coast, and a body that fell from a balcony in the dead of night. The police said it was an accident, but Hercule Poirot's eyes told a different story. 8 guests, 8 secrets, and a killer hiding among them. Someone buried a 40-year-old crime. Someone hid a blood connection. Someone's hands were stained with sins of passion. And someone saw everything that night. But who is the murderer? The doctor with a dark past? The Russian countess seeking revenge? The American heiress desperate for recognition? The jealous husband? The unfaithful wife? Or perhaps the one person nobody suspected at all? This mystery will keep you hooked until the very last word. I promise you that. If you love suspense, murder mysteries, and classic detective stories, I hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon, because stories like this drop here regularly. And here's a question for you. With so many suspects and so many secrets, who do you think is the real killer? Drop your guess in the comments. Now, let's begin. Death in Monte Carlo. The Mediterranean sun cast its golden light upon the azure waters as the train wound its way along the coastal tracks toward Monte Carlo. It was the spring of 1936, and the Riviera was alive with the glittering promise of wealth, scandal, and secrets hidden behind silk curtains. Hercule Poirot sat in his first-class compartment, his patent leather shoes polished to perfection, his mustache waxed with mathematical precision. He observed the passing scenery with those remarkable green eyes that missed nothing, not the fisherman mending his nets on the shore, not the villa perched precariously on the cliff, and certainly not the nervous gentleman in the adjacent compartment who had checked his pocket watch precisely 17 times in the last hour. The little gray cells, they require rest, Poirot murmured to himself, though he suspected that rest would prove elusive. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, and trouble had a peculiar way of finding the famous Belgian detective. The train pulled into Monte Carlo station with a theatrical hiss of steam. Porters in crisp uniforms rushed forward, and elegant ladies in flowing dresses descended onto the platform, their pearls catching the afternoon light. Poirot stepped down with careful dignity, his leather valise clutched firmly in his gloved hand. Monsieur Poirot. He turned to find a young man approaching, perhaps 30 years of age, with the lean, anxious look of someone who carried burdens too heavy for his shoulders. His suit was expensive but rumpled, as though he had slept in it, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "I am Victor Ashworth," the young man said, extending his hand. "Lady Pemberton sent me to collect you. She is most eager for your arrival." Poirot tilted his head, studying the young man with quiet intensity. Lady Pemberton, she did not mention in her letter that she would send an escort. Victor's smile faltered. "There have been developments, Monsieur Poirot. Developments that have made her ladyship rather more anxious than when she first wrote to you." "Developments of what nature?" The young man glanced around the crowded platform, lowering his voice. "A death, monsieur, 3 nights ago, at one of the guests at Villa Marguerite, where her ladyship is hosting her annual spring gathering." Poirot's mustache twitched with interest. "And the police? What do they say?" "They say it was an accident. Lord Blackwood fell from his balcony after drinking too much champagne." Victor paused, his jaw tightening. "But Lady Pemberton believes otherwise. She believes it was murder." The drive from the station to Villa Marguerite took them along winding roads that climbed into the hills above the sparkling bay. The villa itself was a magnificent affair. White stone walls draped in bougainvillea, tall windows reflecting the dying sunlight, and gardens that cascaded down the hillside in terraces of roses and lavender. A butler with silver hair and an impassive face greeted them at the entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Pemberton awaits you in the drawing-room." The interior of the villa was a testament to old money and older taste. Oil paintings of stern ancestors lined the corridors, and antique furniture stood upon Persian carpets that had likely witnessed 3 generations of secrets. The air smelled of wood polish and faded flowers. Lady Pemberton rose from a velvet chaise as Poirot entered. She was a woman of perhaps 60 years, still handsome, with sharp blue eyes and silver hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure. Her black dress spoke of mourning, but her expression spoke of determination. "Monsieur Poirot, thank heaven you have come." She extended her hand, which he took with a small bow. "I fear I am surrounded by liars and fools, and Lord Blackwood's death weighs upon my conscience like a stone." "You believe he was murdered, no, Lady Pemberton?" "I know he was murdered." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Because the night before, he died. He came to me in this very room and told me that someone in this house wanted him dead. He said he had discovered something, a secret so terrible that someone would kill to protect it. And did he reveal the nature of this secret?" Lady Pemberton's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He was going to tell me at breakfast the next morning, but breakfast never came for Lord Blackwood, only death." Through the window, Poirot could see the other guests gathering on the terrace for evening drinks, elegant figures moving like chess pieces on a board. Somewhere among them, he knew, lurked a murderer. "Tell me, Lady Pemberton," he said quietly, "so who else resides in this house of secrets?" Chapter 2. The Guests of Villa Marguerite. Lady Pemberton settled back into her chaise, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the cup of cold tea beside her. The evening light had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the drawing-room, and somewhere in the depths of the villa, a clock chimed 7 times. "There are 8 of us remaining," she began, her voice measured and careful. 9, if we count poor Lord Blackwood's body, which still lies in the chapel awaiting transport to England. The local authorities have been accommodating, shall we say. Money speaks loudly in Monte Carlo, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot lowered himself into a Louis XIV chair, positioning himself so that he could observe both Lady Pemberton and the terrace beyond the window. "Please, madame, tell me of each guest. Omit nothing, however insignificant it may seem." "Very well." Lady Pemberton drew a deep breath. "First, there is my nephew, Victor Ashworth, whom you have already met. He is the son of my late sister, and I have raised him as my own since he was 12 years old. Victor stands to inherit a considerable fortune upon my death, a fact that has not escaped the notice of certain parties. He seemed troubled when he collected me from the station." "Victor is always troubled. He has debts, Monsieur Poirot. Gambling debts. Monte Carlo is perhaps not the wisest destination for a young man with his particular weakness." She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Lord Blackwood held several of Victor's promissory notes, substantial ones." Poirot filed this information away in the orderly cabinets of his mind. "Oh, continue, s'il vous plaît." "Then we have Sir Reginald and Lady Hartley. Sir Reginald is something important in the Foreign Office, or was before his retirement last year. He is a large, blustering sort of man, fond of whiskey and shooting. His wife, Cordelia, is 20 years his junior, and possessed of a beauty that has caused considerable trouble over the years. What manner of trouble? Lady Pemberton's eyes flickered toward the terrace, where a woman in a crimson dress stood apart from the others, smoking a cigarette in a long holder. The usual manner, monsieur. Cordelia collects admirers the way some women collect jewels, and Lord Blackwood was, until recently, her most devoted acquisition. An affair? I do not deal in gossip, Lady Pemberton said primly, though her expression suggested otherwise. But they were observed together on several occasions, in circumstances that were compromising. The woman in crimson turned, and even from this distance, Poirot could see that she was extraordinarily beautiful, the kind of beauty that launched ships and destroyed kingdoms. Dark hair swept back from a pale face, red lips curved in perpetual amusement, and eyes that held secrets like deep wells hold water. And Sir Reginald? Was he aware of his wife's friendship with Lord Blackwood? Sir Reginald is aware of everything, Monsieur Poirot. He simply chooses to ignore what he cannot control. Lady Pemberton's voice carried a note of contempt, though I noticed that on the night Lord Blackwood died, Sir Reginald consumed rather more whiskey than usual, and his hands shook when he raised his glass. Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Who else? Miss Evangeline Cross, a young American heiress. Her father made his fortune in steel, and she has come to Europe seeking culture, and, one suspects, a titled husband. She is perhaps 25, pretty enough in that fresh American way, and utterly guileless. Or so she appears. You doubt her innocence? I doubt everyone's innocence, monsieur. That is why I sent for you. Lady Pemberton reached for a small bell on the table beside her. Miss Cross arrived at Villa Marguerite 3 weeks ago, a complete stranger. She claimed to have met Lord Blackwood at a party in Paris and accepted his invitation to join our gathering. Yet I have since learned that she and Lord Blackwood corresponded for nearly 6 months before that supposed chance meeting. Interesting. Most interesting. Then there is Dr. Edmund Graves, a physician from Harley Street, who has attended to my health for many years. He is perhaps 50, a widower, quiet and scholarly. He spends most of his time in the library, reading or writing letters. And his connection to Lord Blackwood? Lady Pemberton hesitated. The first time Poirot had observed uncertainty in her manner. They knew each other long ago, at Cambridge, I believe, but there was some falling out. Neither would speak of it, and the atmosphere between them these past 2 weeks has been decidedly cold. Through the window, Poirot observed a thin, stooped figure emerging onto the terrace. A man with spectacles and graying hair, who moved with the careful precision of one, accustomed to handling delicate instruments. Dr. Graves accepted a drink from a servant, then retreated to a corner, watching the other guests with hooded eyes. The remaining guest? Countess Vera Dobrova. Lady Pemberton spoke the name as though it tasted bitter on her tongue. A Russian émigré, or so she claims. She arrived with letters of introduction from the Duchess of Windsor, and has been charming everyone with tales of her tragic escape from the Bolsheviks. But there is something false about her, Monsieur Poirot. Something painted over, like a restoration on a damaged canvas. You suspect she is not who she claims to be? I suspect nothing. I merely observe. Lady Pemberton rose, her black dress rustling like whispered secrets. "Now come, monsieur. It is time for dinner, and time for you to meet the inhabitants of my little house of cards. Watch them carefully. One of them pushed Lord Blackwood to his death, and I intend to see them hang for it." Chapter 3. Dinner with Shadows. The dining room of Villa Marguerite was a cathedral of elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from frescoed ceilings, their light dancing upon silverware and fine china. Candles flickered in ornate holders, casting shadows that seemed to breathe and move like living things. The long mahogany table could seat 20, but tonight only 8 places were set. 8 islands of white linen in a sea of polished wood. Poirot entered on Lady Pemberton's arm, his keen eyes sweeping across the assembled guests like a lighthouse beam searching troubled waters. Each face, each gesture, and each nervous glance was catalogued and stored in the vast library of his mind. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lady Pemberton announced, "may I present Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the celebrated detective. He will be our guest for the remainder of the week." A silence fell upon the room, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Poirot observed the reactions with intense interest. Victor Ashworth went pale, his hand freezing halfway to his wine-glass. Sir Reginald Hartley's ruddy face darkened to an alarming shade of purple. Lady Cordelia. Hartley merely smiled, her crimson lips curving like a cat's. "A detective?" Sir Reginald's voice boomed across the table. "What the devil do we need a detective for? Blackwood's death was an accident. The police said so themselves." "The police say many things, Sir Reginald." Poirot took his seat with careful precision, adjusting his napkin with geometric exactness. "But truth, she is sometimes shy. She hides in corners and must be coaxed into the light." Miss Evangeline Cross leaned forward, her blue eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine excitement. "How thrilling! A real detective, just like in the novels. Will you interrogate us all, Monsieur Poirot? Shall we provide alibis?" "Evangeline, really." Dr. Edmund Graves spoke for the first time, his voice dry as old paper. "A man is dead. This is hardly entertainment." "Forgive me, Dr. Graves." The American girl blushed prettily, lowering her eyes. "I meant no disrespect to Lord Blackwood's memory. I am simply nervous, I suppose. Death makes me nervous." "Death makes everyone nervous, my dear." The speaker was Countess Vera Dobrova, seated at the far end of the table, like a queen holding court. She was perhaps 45, with high Slavic cheekbones and eyes the color of winter ice. Diamonds glittered at her throat, real ones, Poirot noted, and very fine. "In Russia, we learn to live with death as a constant companion. It makes one appreciate the finer things." She raised her champagne glass in a silent toast, and for a moment her eyes met Poirot's across the table. Something flickered in their icy depths, recognition, perhaps, or warning. The first course arrived, a delicate consommé that smelled of herbs and secrets. Poirot sipped carefully, watching the interplay of glances and silences around the table. Lady Cordelia Hartley had not spoken since his arrival, but her eyes spoke volumes. They darted between her husband and Dr. Graves, as between Victor Ashworth and the empty chair where Lord Blackwood should have sat. "Tell me," Poirot said, addressing no one in particular, "about the night Lord Blackwood died. What do you remember?" "We had dinner as usual." Victor's voice was tight, controlled. "Afterwards, some of us played cards in the library. Others retired early." "And Lord Blackwood? What did he do?" "He was drinking." Sir Reginald stabbed at his soup with unnecessary violence. Drinking heavily, as he often did. Made a nuisance of himself, if you ask me. Kept going on about secrets and revelations. Nonsense, all of it. Secrets? Poirot's ears pricked up like a hunting dog's. What manner of secrets? How should I know? The man was drunk. He said everyone at this table was hiding something, and that he intended to expose us all. Sir Reginald laughed, but the sound was hollow. Theatrical rubbish. Blackwood always did love an audience. And then? And then he stumbled off to bed around midnight. That was the last anyone saw of him alive. Sir Reginald drained his wine glass in one swallow. His body was found on the terrace below his balcony the next morning. Clear case of drunken misadventure. Poirot turned his attention to Lady Cordelia, who had remained silent throughout her husband's account. And you, madame? What do you remember of that evening? For a long moment she did not answer. Her beautiful face was a mask of perfect composure, but Poirot noticed that her fingers had tightened around her spoon until the knuckles turned white. I retired early, she said finally, her voice cool as mountain water. I had a headache. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Your room? It is near Lord Blackwood's? 2 doors down. She met his gaze without flinching. But these old walls are thick, Monsieur Poirot. Sound does not travel easily, unless one is listening for it. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere at the table. Poirot could not identify the source, but he noted it nonetheless. The main course arrived, roasted pheasant with seasonal vegetables, but Poirot had little appetite. His mind was working, turning over pieces of a puzzle that had not yet revealed its shape. Lord Blackwood's room, he said to Lady Pemberton. It has been preserved? Exactly as he left it. The police made their examination, but I permitted nothing to be touched afterwards. I knew you would wish to see it. Excellent. After dinner, if you please. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the occasional murmured request for salt or wine. But beneath the surface, calm, Poirot sensed currents of fear and hatred swirling like poison in the blood. One of these elegant guests was a murderer, and before the week was out, he intended to prove it. Chapter 4. The Dead Man's Room. The clock in the hallway struck 10 as Poirot climbed the grand staircase, Lady Pemberton leading the way with a silver candelabra. The electric lights had been installed only in the main rooms, she explained, and the upper corridors still relied upon the flickering warmth of candlelight. Shadows danced upon the walls like restless spirits. Lord Blackwood occupied the blue room. Lady Pemberton said, pausing before a heavy oak door. It has the finest view of the bay. I always give it to my most honored guests. She produced a brass key from her pocket and turned it in the lock. The door swung open with a soft groan, releasing the stale air of a room that had been sealed for 3 days. Poirot entered first, his patent leather shoes silent upon the thick carpet. The room was indeed blue. Walls of pale azure silk, curtains of deeper sapphire, and a ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs in the Italian style. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its covers still rumpled and thrown back as though the occupant had risen in haste. Nothing has been touched? Nothing. I gave strict orders to the servants. Poirot moved through the room with the careful precision of a surgeon, his eyes missing nothing. A half-empty bottle of cognac stood upon the bedside table. on beside a crystal glass, still bearing the residue of its last drink. A gold pocket watch lay open, its hands frozen at 23 minutes past midnight, and upon the writing desk a sheet of paper covered in hasty, almost illegible handwriting. What is this? Poirot bent over the paper, careful not to touch it. Lady Pemberton approached, holding the candelabra higher. I do not know. The police glanced at it but considered it unimportant. Lord Blackwood's personal effects, they said. Poirot read aloud, his voice soft in the silent room. The truth will out. Cambridge, 1899. He knows what happened. God forgive us both. Cambridge, 1899? Lady Pemberton frowned. What could that possibly mean? That, madame, is what we must discover. Poirot straightened, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. Lord Blackwood and Graves, they were at Cambridge together, you said? Yes, but that was nearly 40 years ago. Surely nothing from that time could be relevant to. In the garden of crime, madame, the oldest roots often produce the deadliest flowers. He moved toward the French doors that led to the balcony. They stood slightly ajar, the night breeze stirring the curtains like ghostly fingers. Poirot pushed them open and stepped outside. The balcony was small, perhaps 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, with an ornate iron railing that came to just above waist height. Below lay the stone terrace where Lord Blackwood's body had been discovered, some 30 feet down. The fall would certainly have been fatal. Poirot examined the railing with intense concentration. He ran his gloved fingers along its surface, feeling for anything unusual. And then he found it. Lady Pemberton, bring the light closer, if you please. She joined him on the balcony, and the candlelight revealed what his fingers had detected, a small section of the iron railing that had been recently oiled. The rest of the metalwork was slightly rough with age and salt air, but this portion, perhaps 8 inches wide, was smooth and slick. Someone prepared this railing, Poirot murmured. They made it slippery, so that a man who leaned against it, a man who had perhaps drunk too much cognac, might easily lose his grip and fall. Murder, Lady Pemberton breathed. I knew it. I knew it in my bones. But there is more. Poirot pointed to the floor of the balcony, where faint scuff marks were visible in the dust. You see these marks? They suggest a struggle, brief but violent. Lord Blackwood did not simply fall. He was pushed. They returned inside, and Poirot continued his methodical examination of the room. He opened drawers, peered under furniture, and inspected the contents of Lord Blackwood's traveling trunk with meticulous care. Most of what he found was unremarkable. Expensive clothes, toiletries, a collection of French novels. But in a hidden compartment at the bottom of the trunk, his fingers discovered something unexpected. Photographs, he announced, drawing out a leather folder. Very old photographs. There were 3 of them, yellowed with age and mounted on stiff cardboard in the Victorian fashion. The first showed a group of young men in academic robes, standing before the gates of what was unmistakably Cambridge University. Poirot recognized a youthful Lord Blackwood in the center, handsome and arrogant even then. Beside him stood another young man, thin, bespectacled, with a serious expression. Dr. Graves, Lady Pemberton confirmed. My goodness, how young he looks. The second photograph showed the same group at some sort of celebration, a formal dinner perhaps. They were raising glasses to the camera, their faces flushed with wine and youth. But there was a third figure in this image, standing slightly apart from the others. A young woman of remarkable beauty, with dark hair and knowing eyes. "Who is she?" Poirot asked. "I have no idea. I have never seen her before." The third photograph made Lady Pemberton gasp. It showed a body lying in what appeared to be a garden. A woman's body, her white dress stained with something dark. Her face was not visible, but her dark hair spread around her head like a halo of shadows. "Ah, dear God," Lady Pemberton whispered. "Is she dead?" "It would appear so." Poirot studied the image with grim intensity. "And I suspect, madame, that this photograph, this ancient secret from Cambridge, 1899, is the reason Lord Blackwood was murdered." He slipped the photographs into his pocket and moved toward the door. "Tomorrow, I shall have a conversation with Dr. Graves. Tonight, I must think." "Do you believe he is the murderer?" Poirot paused at the threshold, his expression unreadable. "I believe, Lady Pemberton, that we have only begun to scratch the surface of this mystery. Lord Blackwood knew secrets, dangerous secrets that someone would kill to protect. And until I understand the past, I cannot hope to solve the present." He bowed slightly and disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, leaving Lady Pemberton alone with her candelabra and her fears. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Confession. Morning arrived wrapped in Mediterranean mist, the sun struggling to pierce the gray veil that had descended upon Monte Carlo overnight. Poirot rose early, as was his habit, and performed his toilette with customary precision. His mustache received particular attention. 15 minutes of careful waxing and shaping until each point achieved geometric perfection. At 7:30, he descended to the breakfast room and found it nearly empty. Only Dr. Edmund Graves sat at the long table, a cup of black coffee before him and a medical journal open in his hands. He looked up as Poirot entered, and something flickered across his thin face. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "Monsieur Poirot, you are an early riser. The mind, it does not rest easily when there is work to be done." Poirot helped himself to coffee from the silver service and took a seat directly across from the doctor. "You also could not sleep, I think." Dr. Graves closed his journal and removed his spectacles, rubbing his eyes with visible weariness. "I have not slept properly since Lord Blackwood died. The memories, you see, they come back in the darkness." Memories of Cambridge. The doctor's hand trembled, rattling his coffee cup against its saucer. "Lady Pemberton told you." "Lady Pemberton told me that you and Lord Blackwood knew each other long ago, that there was some falling out between you." Poirot reached into his pocket and produced the 3 photographs, laying them upon the white tablecloth like cards in a game of death. "But these photographs, they tell me much more, Doctor." And Graves stared at the images as though they were poisonous serpents. His already pale face turned the color of old bone, and his breathing became shallow and rapid. For a long moment, Poirot thought he might faint. "Where did you find these?" "In Lord Blackwood's room, hidden, but not hidden well enough." Poirot tapped the 3rd photograph, the one showing the dead woman. "Who is she, Doctor, and what happened in Cambridge in 1899? The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Outside, a seagull cried mournfully, and the mist pressed against the windows like a prisoner seeking escape. Finally, Dr. Graves spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She was Spanish, the daughter of a diplomat stationed in London. His eyes grew distant, lost in memories 4 decades old. Jules, she was the most beautiful creature I have ever seen, and I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. God help me, I loved her with all my foolish young heart. But Lord Blackwood loved her also. A bitter laugh escaped the doctor's lips. Blackwood did not know the meaning of love. He knew only possession, conquest, desire. Elena was a prize to be won, nothing more. And when she chose me over him, he could not bear it. Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes intense. What happened? We were to be married, Elena and I. We had made plans in secret, knowing that her father would never approve of a match with a penniless medical student. We were going to elope on the night of the summer ball. Dr. Graves's voice cracked with old grief. But Blackwood discovered our plans. He went to Elena's father and told him everything. Lies mixed with truth, and poison mixed with honey. He said I had compromised her, that I was a fortune hunter, that I had seduced her against her will. And her father believed him. Blackwood could be very convincing when he wished. The diplomat was furious. He confined Elena to her rooms and made arrangements to send her back to Spain immediately. Dr. Graves removed his spectacles and wiped his eyes. That night, she escaped from her window. She came to find me, to beg me to run away with her before it was too late. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. The doctor's voice was hollow now, emptied of everything but despair. There was a garden behind my college, a private garden with high walls, where students were forbidden to go. Elena was waiting for me there, but Blackwood had followed her. He confronted her. I demanded that she abandon me and become his mistress instead. When she refused, when she spat in his face and called him a monster, he stopped, unable to continue. His thin frame shook with silent sobs. He killed her, Poirot said softly. It was not a question. He pushed her. She fell backward and struck her head upon a stone bench. By the time I arrived, she was already dead, and Blackwood was standing over her body, laughing. Dr. Graves's hands clenched into fists. Laughing, Monsieur Poirot, as though her death was nothing more than an amusing anecdote. And you helped him conceal the crime. The shame in the doctor's eyes was answer enough. He threatened to say that I had killed her. His father was a viscount, mine was a country parson. Who would the authorities believe? I was young, I was frightened, and I was guilty, not of murder, but of cowardice. He hung his head. We buried her in the garden beneath a rose bush, and we never spoke of it again. Poirot studied the broken man before him with a mixture of pity and calculation. Until last week. Dr. Graves nodded slowly. Blackwood was dying, you see. A cancer of the liver. I diagnosed it myself 3 months ago. He had perhaps 6 months to live, possibly less. And in the face of death, he found something resembling a conscience. He wished to confess. He wished to be absolved. He told me he intended to tell everyone the truth, to clear his soul before meeting his Maker. The doctor laughed bitterly. 40 years of silence, and suddenly he wanted to play the penitent. But his confession would have destroyed me, Monsieur Poirot. My reputation, my career, everything I have built would have crumbled to dust. And so you killed him. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Graves met Poirot's gaze steadily, and for the first time, a strange calm descended upon his features. No, Monsieur Poirot, I did not kill him, though God knows I wanted to, many times over the years. He rose from his chair, suddenly looking very old. I have told you the truth about Cambridge because the truth no longer matters. But I did not push Lord Blackwood from that balcony. On the night he died, I was in my room writing a letter to my solicitor, a letter explaining everything in case Blackwood carried out his threat. Can anyone confirm this? No one. I was alone with my ghosts. Dr. Graves walked slowly toward the door, then paused and looked back. But consider this, Monsieur Poirot. If I had wanted Blackwood dead, would I not have done it years ago? Why wait until he was already dying? He left without another word, and Poirot sat alone with his cold coffee and his thoughts. Chapter 6. The American Heiress. The mist had lifted by mid-morning, revealing a sky of brilliant blue and a sea that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Poirot walked in the villa gardens, his mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle like a jeweler examining precious stones. Dr. Graves had provided valuable information, but something in his story did not quite ring true. The little gray cells whispered that there was more to discover. He found Miss Evangeline Cross sitting alone on a marble bench near the rose garden, a book open in her lap, but her eyes fixed upon the distant horizon. She wore a dress of pale yellow that made her look younger than her 25 years, and her golden hair caught the sunlight like spun honey. "Mademoiselle Cross, may I join you?" She startled at his voice, the book tumbling from her fingers. "Monsieur Poirot, you frightened me. I was miles away." "My apologies." Poirot retrieved the fallen book, a French novel by Colette, and handed it back with a small bow. "You read French, mademoiselle?" "Badly, I'm afraid, but I'm trying to improve." She smiled, but the expression did not reach her eyes. There were shadows there, Poirot noticed, shadows that had no place on the face of a carefree American heiress. "Won't you sit down?" He settled beside her on the bench, arranging the creases of his trousers with habitual care. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, I watching a gardener tend to the roses in the distance. "You are troubled, mademoiselle." "Is it that obvious?" She laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I suppose I'm not very good at hiding my feelings. Father always said I wore my heart on my sleeve." "Your father, he is in America?" "Pittsburgh. He makes steel." She said it without pride or shame, simply stating a fact. "I came to Europe last year to see the world, to experience culture, to escape from—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "To escape from what, mademoiselle?" Evangeline was silent for a long moment, her fingers twisting the pages of her book. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "From an arranged marriage. My father wanted me to marry the son of his business partner, a horrible man with cold hands and cruel eyes. I refused, and we quarreled terribly. He said if I would not obey him, I could find my own way in the world." She shrugged, a gesture of false indifference. "So here I am, finding my way. And Lord Blackwood, how does he fit into your way?" The change in her demeanor was immediate and striking. Her face, which had been open and almost friendly, became a closed door. Her blue eyes turned hard as sapphires. "I don't know what you mean." "Come now, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was gentle but persistent. "Lady Pemberton tells me that you and Lord Blackwood corresponded for 6 months before your supposed chance meeting in Paris. That is rather more than a casual acquaintance, n'est-ce pas?" Evangeline rose abruptly from the bench, by the book falling once more to the ground. She walked several paces toward the roses, her back turned to Poirot, her shoulders rigid with tension. "Who told her that? It's a lie, a vicious, horrible lie." "Is it? Then perhaps you can explain why Lord Blackwood invited a complete stranger to a private gathering at Villa Marguerite. Lady Pemberton's guest list is most exclusive, I understand. One does not simply appear without connections." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of seabirds and the soft snip of the gardener's shears. Finally, Evangeline turned to face him, and Poirot saw that her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. You want the truth? I will give you the truth." She drew a shaky breath, steadying herself. Lord Blackwood was my father. Of all the revelations Poirot had anticipated, this was not among them. He kept his face carefully neutral, but his mind raced with new possibilities. "Explain, s'il vous plaît." Evangeline returned to the bench, sitting heavily as though the confession had drained her strength. "My mother was an actress, a beautiful, foolish woman who fell in love with an English lord during his visit to New York in 1910. She was 18 years old and believed all his pretty promises." Her voice turned bitter. "He promised to marry her, to take her back to England, to give her a life of luxury and happiness. Instead, he gave her a child and disappeared. You, me, when my mother discovered she was pregnant, she wrote to Lord Blackwood begging for help. He never replied. She was ruined, of course, unmarried, yet with a baby on the way. Her family disowned her. She might have starved if my father, my adopted father, I mean, had not found her working as a seamstress and offered her marriage. A generous man. A practical man." Evangeline smiled sadly. "He needed a wife to run his household, and he didn't particularly care about her past. He raised me as his own, gave me his name, and never spoke of my true parentage. Mother told me the truth on her deathbed 5 years ago. She gave me Lord Blackwood's letters, the ones he wrote before he abandoned her, and begged me to find him. And so you came to Europe. And so I came to Europe. It took months to track him down, and when I finally wrote to him, I expected nothing. Anger, perhaps, or denial. But instead..." She paused, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Instead, he was delighted to hear from me. He invited me to join him here, said he wanted to make amends for the past, that he was ill and wished to set things right before he died." Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Did he acknowledge you as his daughter?" "Not publicly. He said he needed time, that there were complications." She laughed bitterly. "There are always complications, aren't there?" Evangeline's voice was flat, emotionless. "And with him died any hope of recognition, of legitimacy, of the inheritance that should have been mine by right." Poirot considered this carefully. Here was another motive, another shadow in the tangled web of secrets that surrounded Lord Blackwood's death. An illegitimate daughter, seeking acknowledgement and fortune. A dying man, who promised much but delivered nothing. "Where were you on the night Lord Blackwood died, mademoiselle?" "In my room, writing letters to friends in America. I went to bed early, around 10 o'clock, and heard nothing until the servants began screaming the next morning." She met his gaze steadily. "I did not kill my father, Monsieur Poirot. Despite everything, I wanted him alive. Dead, he is worth nothing to me. Unless, perhaps, there is a will?" Evangeline's face went pale. I don't know. Lord Blackwood never mentioned a will. Do you think he might have?" I think, mademoiselle, that we must discover whether such a document exists. Poirot rose from the bench, unbrushing imaginary dust from his immaculate jacket. One more question, if you please. Did you know about the other secrets Lord Blackwood carried? The secrets from his past? He hinted at things, dark things. She shivered despite the warm sunshine. He said he had done terrible wrongs, that he wished to confess before he died, but he never told me what those wrongs were. Did he mention Cambridge or a woman named Elena? Evangeline shook her head slowly. No, those names mean nothing to me. Poirot thanked her and began walking back toward the villa, but he had taken only a few steps when her voice called out behind him. Monsieur Poirot? He turned. She stood among the roses, pale and fragile as the petals that surrounded her. Find who killed him. Please. Whatever he was, whatever he did, he was still my father, and someone in this house is a murderer. Chapter 7. The Countess Unmasked. Luncheon was a tense affair. The guests gathered in the sunlit dining room like actors in a play whose script had been lost, each performing their role with visible effort. Sir Reginald drank too much wine and spoke too loudly about politics. Lady Cordelia pushed food around her plate without eating. Victor Ashworth stared at nothing, his young face haggard with sleeplessness. And Countess Vera Dobrova watched them all with those ice-cold eyes, a sphinx wrapped in silk and diamonds. Poirot observed everything and said little. His mind was constructing a framework, connecting threads that had previously seemed unrelated. Lord Blackwood's past contained at least 2 secrets worth killing for: the death of Elena Vasquez in Cambridge, and the existence of an illegitimate daughter in America. But were there more? And which secret had ultimately sealed his fate? After luncheon, he requested a private audience with Countess Dobrova. She received him in her suite, a lavish arrangement of cream and gold, with windows overlooking the glittering bay. She reclined upon a chaise longue, like a painting by Boldini, her silver cigarette holder trailing smoke like incense. Monsieur Poirot, I wondered when you would come to interrogate me. Her English was perfect, touched with only the faintest hint of an accent. Please, sit. Would you like tea, or perhaps something stronger? Nothing. Thank you, Countess. Poirot took a chair opposite her, positioning himself so that the light from the window fell upon her face. I wish only to ask you some questions about Lord Blackwood. Ask whatever you like. I have nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide, Countess. It is simply a matter of discovering what. He paused, letting the silence work upon her nerves. How long had you known Lord Blackwood? We met 3 months ago, at a party in Cannes. He was charming, witty, and obviously very wealthy. She shrugged elegantly. I am a practical woman, Monsieur Poirot. I have learned to appreciate such qualities. You are a widow, I understand. My husband, Count Dobrova, died during the Revolution. We escaped from St. Petersburg in 1918, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the jewels I had sewn into my corset. Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where diamonds still glittered. He did not survive the journey. Typhus, in Constantinople. A tragic story. Europe is full of tragic stories, monsieur. Mine is hardly unique. Poirot nodded sympathetically, but his eyes remained sharp. Tell me, Countess, have you ever visited England? Perhaps many years ago, before the Revolution? Something flickered in her face, a shadow, quickly suppressed. I traveled extensively in my youth, London, Paris, Vienna. My family had connections everywhere. And Cambridge? Did you ever visit Cambridge? The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Her fingers tightened around the cigarette holder. Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, and her eyes, those winter eyes, grew colder still. Why do you ask about Cambridge? Because Lord Blackwood spent his youth there. Because something happened in Cambridge in 1899, something that someone would kill to keep secret. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. Because I have seen a photograph, Countess, an old photograph of a young woman with dark hair and knowing eyes, a woman who looks remarkably like you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece seemed to hold its breath. Countess Dobrova's face had become a mask, beautiful and terrible in its stillness. You are mistaken, Monsieur Poirot. Am I? Then perhaps you would be so kind as to explain something to me. He reached into his pocket and produced the photograph of the young woman at the Cambridge dinner. This woman, she is Spanish, I am told, Elena Vasquez, daughter of a diplomat. She died in the spring of 1899. Oh, and her body was buried in a college garden. He paused, watching her reaction with intense concentration. But here is what puzzles me, Countess. If Elena Vasquez died in 1899, how is it that she sits before me now, smoking a cigarette and wearing diamonds that were supposedly sewn into a corset in St. Petersburg? For a long moment, the woman who called herself Countess Dobrova did not move. Then, slowly, she began to laugh, a low, bitter sound that held no mirth. Bravo, Monsieur Poirot, bravo. She crushed her cigarette in a crystal ashtray with deliberate force. I should have known that nothing escapes those famous gray cells of yours. Then you admit it? You are Elena Vasquez? I was Elena Vasquez, a lifetime ago, in another world. She rose from the chaise and walked to the window. Her back turned to Poirot. The girl who bore that name died in Cambridge. What rose from those ashes was something different, something harder. You did not die. The body in the garden, it was not yours. No, it was my sister's. Her voice was distant, hollow. My younger sister, Maria. She had come to Cambridge in secret to warn me that our father had discovered my plans to elope. She arrived just in time to witness my confrontation with Blackwood. Poirot's mind raced, reordering the pieces of the puzzle. It was she who fell, she who struck her head upon the stone bench. Yes, Elena, for that was who she truly was, turned to face him, and for the first time her mask had cracked. Tears glistened upon her high cheekbones. Maria tried to intervene when Blackwood attacked me. He pushed her away, and she fell. It was an accident, a horrible, senseless accident. But she was dead, and I was alone with two men who had every reason to see me silenced forever. Blackwood and Dr. Graves. They buried her in the garden and swore me to secrecy. They said that if I spoke, they would tell the authorities that I had killed my own sister. Who would believe the word of a disgraced Spanish girl against two English gentlemen? Her laugh was bitter as poison. And so Elena Vasquez disappeared. I fled England, changed my name, reinvented myself. Eventually I made my way to Russia, where I married the Count and began a new life. But you never forgot. I never forgot, and I never forgave. Her eyes blazed with decades of suppressed rage. For 40 years, I have waited for my revenge. When I learned that Blackwood was dying, I knew the moment had finally come. Poirot rose from his chair, his expression grave. You came to Villa Marguerite to kill him. I came to Villa Marguerite to confront him, to force him to confess his crimes before witnesses, to destroy his reputation as he destroyed my life. She shook her head slowly. But someone else killed him before I had the chance. You expect me to believe this? I expect nothing, Monsieur Poirot, but I tell you the truth. She met his gaze without flinching. On the night Blackwood died, I went to his room at midnight. I intended to force a confession from him, by any means necessary. But when I arrived, his door was already ajar. I heard voices inside, angry voices arguing in whispers. Whose voices? I could not tell. One was Blackwood's, certainly. The other was muffled, indistinct. She wrapped her arms around herself, I suddenly looking old, despite her elegant facade. I was afraid, Monsieur Poirot, afraid that my presence would be discovered. So I fled back to my room and stayed there until morning. And you saw nothing? No one in the corridor? Elena hesitated, her brow furrowing with the effort of memory. There was a shadow, moving at the far end of the hallway, near the servants' staircase. I thought it was a maid, but now I am not certain. Poirot filed this information away, adding it to the growing collection of clues and contradictions. A shadow near the servants' staircase, another piece of the puzzle. But where did it fit? One last question, Countess. Or should I say, Señorita Vasquez? He paused at the door, his hand upon the handle. If you did not kill Lord Blackwood, do you know who did? Elena's smile was thin and cold as a blade. But no, Monsieur Poirot. But whoever it was, they have my eternal gratitude. Chapter 8. The Jealous Husband. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Poirot stood upon the terrace where Lord Blackwood's body had been discovered, his eyes tracing the path from the balcony above to the cold stones beneath his feet. The fall had been fatal. Of that there could be no doubt, but the circumstances surrounding that fall grew more complex with each passing hour. 3 suspects now occupied his thoughts. Dr. Edmund Graves, bound to Blackwood by an ancient crime and the fear of exposure. Miss Evangeline Cross, an illegitimate daughter seeking recognition and inheritance. And Elena Vasquez, masquerading as Countess Dobrova, nursing 4 decades of hatred and dreams of revenge. Each had motive, each had opportunity, and each claimed innocence. But there were others in this house of secrets, others whose shadows had not yet been examined. Poirot found Sir Reginald Hartley in the library, slumped in a leather armchair with a glass of whiskey clutched in his meaty hand. The room smelled of tobacco smoke and old books, and the curtains had been drawn against the afternoon light, creating an atmosphere of deliberate gloom. Sir Reginald, a word, if you please. The older man looked up with bloodshot eyes. He was perhaps 60 years of age, with the ruddy complexion and broken veins of a lifelong drinker. His military bearing had softened into corpulence, and his once proud mustache drooped with neglect. Poirot, come to interrogate me, have you? He gestured vaguely toward a nearby chair. Sit down, sit down. Everyone else has lied to you today. Might as well add my name to the list. You believe the other guests have been untruthful? I believe everyone in this damned house is hiding something. Sir Reginald drained his whiskey and reached for the decanter on the table beside him. Including myself, I suppose, though my secrets are hardly worth killing for. Poirot settled into the indicated chair, crossing his legs with precise elegance. Perhaps you will allow me to be the judge of that. Tell me, Sir Reginald, what was your relationship with Lord Blackwood? Relationship? The word emerged as a bark of bitter laughter. We had no relationship, Poirot. Blackwood was a snake, a charming, handsome, utterly contemptible snake. I despised him from the moment I met him. And yet you accepted Lady Pemberton's invitation to spend 2 weeks in his company? Sir Reginald's face darkened, and his grip tightened around his glass, until Poirot feared it might shatter. I came because my wife insisted. Cordelia adores the Riviera, and Lady Pemberton is a valuable social connection. I had no idea Blackwood would be among the guests. But you discovered his presence upon your arrival. Indeed I did, and I nearly turned around and went straight back to England. He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. But Cordelia begged me to stay. She said it would cause a scandal if we left so abruptly. And I, like the fool I have always been where she is concerned, agreed. Poirot allowed a moment of silence to settle between them. Then, with the delicacy of a surgeon wielding a scalpel, he asked the question that had been forming in his mind. Your wife and Lord Blackwood, they were lovers, were they not? The glass slipped from Sir Reginald's fingers, shattering upon the hardwood floor. Whiskey spread across the polished surface like blood from a wound. But the old man made no move to clean it up. He simply sat there, staring at Poirot with an expression of profound defeat. You know, then. I suspected. Now I am certain. Sir Reginald buried his face in his hands, and for a long moment the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. When he finally spoke, his voice was muffled and broken. It began 3 years ago, in London. I was away on government business, something tedious at the Foreign Office that kept me occupied for weeks at a time. Cordelia was lonely, bored, restless, and Blackwood was there, with his flattery and his flowers and his damnable charm. How did you discover the affair? Anonymous letters. Isn't that always the way? He laughed bitterly, lowering his hands to reveal eyes red with unshed tears. Someone, I never learned who, sent me detailed accounts of their meetings, hotels, restaurants, private boxes at the opera, every sordid detail spelled out in elegant handwriting. And what did you do? What could I do? I confronted Cordelia, of course. She wept. She begged forgiveness. She swore it was over. His jaw tightened with suppressed rage. But it wasn't over. It was never over. I could see it in the way she looked at him, the way she found excuses to be in his company. Even here, at Villa Marguerite, they would disappear for hours at a time. Poirot considered this carefully. Here was another motive, ancient and powerful as the hills. Jealousy. A husband betrayed, humiliated, driven to the edge of madness by his wife's infidelity. Where were you on the night Lord Blackwood died? Sir Reginald met his gaze without flinching. In my room, drinking myself into oblivion, as usual. I passed out around 11 o'clock and didn't wake until the servants began screaming the next morning. Can anyone verify this? Cordelia can. She was with me until I fell asleep. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Ironic, isn't it? My alibi depends upon the word of the woman who has betrayed me countless times. And Lady Cordelia, where did she go after you fell asleep? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sir Reginald's expression shifted, by suspicion dawning in his bloodshot eyes. "She said she went to her own room. We maintain separate chambers, have done for years." He paused, a terrible thought clearly forming in his mind. "You don't think Cordelia couldn't have?" "I think nothing, Sir Reginald. I merely gather facts." Poirot rose from his chair, brushing imaginary dust from his trousers. "But I must ask you one more question, and I beg you to answer with complete honesty. On the night Lord Blackwood died, did you leave your room at any time?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I went to the corridor, around midnight." Sir Reginald's voice had dropped to a whisper. "I heard footsteps, you see, light footsteps, moving quickly past my door. I thought it might be Cordelia, going to meet him again." "And did you see who it was?" "No. By the time I opened my door, the corridor was empty. But I smelled something. Perfume, I think. A particular scent that I recognized." "Whose perfume?" Sir Reginald hesitated, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Then, with visible reluctance, he spoke the name. "Countess Dobrova. I recognized her perfume. Something Russian, heavy with jasmine and musk. She had passed by my door only moments before." Poirot nodded slowly, filing this information away. Elena had admitted to going to Blackwood's room at midnight. Her story was corroborated, at least in part, but corroboration was not the same as innocence. "One final question, Sir Reginald. The anonymous letters you received about your wife's affair. Do you still have them?" "I burned them, every last one." Sir Reginald reached for the whiskey decanter. He then seemed to think better of it. "But I remember the handwriting, elegant, feminine, with a slight continental flourish." "Continental?" "European, French or Italian perhaps, or—" He stopped, a new thought clearly occurring to him. "Or Spanish." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Elena Vasquez had been watching Lord Blackwood for years, gathering information, preparing for her revenge. Had she also been sowing discord among those closest to him? "Thank you, Sir Reginald. You have been most helpful." He left the library and stepped onto the terrace, breathing deeply of the salt-scented air. The puzzle was beginning to take shape, but crucial pieces were still missing. Someone in this house was a murderer, and the key to unmasking them lay in understanding the tangled web of secrets that connected them all. But first, he must speak to Lady Cordelia herself. Chapter 9. The Beautiful Widow. Evening had fallen upon Villa Marguerite like a velvet curtain descending upon a stage. The servants moved silently through the corridors, lighting candles and drawing curtains against the darkness that pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a gramophone played a melancholy waltz, music from another era, another world. Poirot found Lady Cordelia Hartley in the conservatory, surrounded by exotic plants and the heavy fragrance of orchids. She sat upon a wrought-iron bench, still as a statue, her crimson dress pooling around her feet like spilled wine. In the dim light, she looked less like a woman of flesh and blood than a portrait by Sargent, beautiful, enigmatic, and utterly remote. "Lady Cordelia, forgive the intrusion." She turned her head slowly, regarding him with those remarkable dark eyes. Up close, Poirot could see the fine lines around her mouth, the shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of powder could conceal. She was still beautiful, undeniably so, but it was the beauty of a rose beginning to fade. "Monsieur Poirot, I wondered when you would come." Her voice was low and musical, touched with the faintest hint of an accent that Poirot could not quite place. Please, sit with me. I grow tired of my own company." He took a seat on a nearby chair, maintaining a respectful distance. The orchids nodded in the breeze from a half-open window, their petals pale as ghosts. "You have been speaking to my husband," she said. It was not a question. "I have spoken to many people today, madam. Each has told me a different version of the truth. And now you wish to hear mine." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Very well. Ask your questions. I have nothing left to hide." "Your affair with Lord Blackwood, when did it end?" Lady Cordelia was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns upon the iron armrest of the bench. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as though recounting events from someone else's life. "It never truly ended, Monsieur Poirot. That was the tragedy of it. Charles, Lord Blackwood, was like a fever in my blood. No matter how many times I swore to forget him, no matter how many tears I shed or promises I made to my husband, I always found myself drawn back." "You loved him?" "I was obsessed with him. It is not the same thing." She laughed softly, bitterly. "Charles had that effect on women. He collected hearts the way other men collect stamps or butterflies. I was simply one more specimen in his collection." "And yet you continued the affair, even here at Villa Marguerite?" "I could not help myself. When I saw him at dinner that first night, looking at me with those cold blue eyes, I knew I was lost." Her hands clenched in her lap. "We met in secret, in the gardens, in the library, wherever we could steal a moment alone. It was madness, pure madness, and yet I could not stop." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but persistent. "On the night Lord Blackwood died, you told me that you retired early with a headache, but your husband says you were with him until he fell asleep around 11 o'clock. Lady Cordelia's composure flickered, a crack appearing in her perfect mask. "Reginald told you that?" "He did. He also told me that he heard footsteps in the corridor around midnight, footsteps that he believed might be yours." The silence stretched between them, heavy as the scent of orchids. Lady Cordelia rose from the bench and walked to the window, her back turned to Poirot. Beyond the glass, the Mediterranean night was black and fathomless. "I lied," she said finally. "I lied to you at dinner, and I have been lying to everyone since Charles died. But I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. That much, at least, is the truth." "Then tell me what really happened." She turned to face him, and Poirot saw that her mask had crumbled entirely. Tears streamed down her cheeks, carving pale tracks through her rouge. "I went to him, around 11:30, after Reginald had fallen asleep. Charles had sent me a note earlier that evening, asking me to come to his room at midnight. He said he had something important to tell me, something that would change everything." "And did you go?" "I went, but I was early, perhaps 20 minutes early. I was afraid of being seen, so I waited in the alcove near the servants' staircase." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "That was when I saw her." "Her?" "The American girl, Evangeline Cross." Lady Cordelia's voice hardened with contempt. She was coming from the direction of Charles's room, walking quickly, almost running. Her face was pale as death, and she was clutching something in her hand, papers of some kind. Poirot's mind raced with this new information. Evangeline had claimed to be in her room all night, writing letters. But if Lady Cordelia spoke the truth, the young American had lied. "Did Miss Cross see you?" "No, I pressed myself into the shadows, and she passed within inches of me without noticing. Lady Cordelia shuddered at the memory. I waited until she had gone, and then I continued to Charles's room. And what did you find? The door was ajar. I pushed it open and called his name, but there was no answer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The room was empty, Monsieur Poirot. The French doors to the balcony were open, and the curtains were blowing in the wind. I knew, somehow I knew, that something terrible had happened. You went to the balcony? I could not bring myself to look. I was afraid of what I might see. She covered her face with her hands. I am a coward, Monsieur Poirot. I fled back to my room and locked the door. I told myself that perhaps I was mistaken, that perhaps Charles had simply gone for a walk in the gardens. Oh, but in my heart, I knew he was dead. Poirot rose and approached her, his expression grave but not unkind. Why did you not tell the police? Why did you not tell anyone? Because I knew how it would look. The jealous husband, the unfaithful wife, the murdered lover. She laughed hollowly. They would have arrested Reginald, or perhaps me. And I could not bear that, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever my faults, I could not let my husband hang for a crime he did not commit. You are certain he did not commit it? Reginald is many things, bitter, broken, consumed by jealousy. But he is not a murderer. She met Poirot's gaze with fierce conviction. He loved me once, truly loved me, before I destroyed everything with my foolishness. He would not kill for me. He would simply drink himself to death and call it justice. Poirot considered her words carefully. Her story aligned with Elena's account, the open door, the empty room, the sense that something had already happened before their arrival, but it also contradicted Evangeline's claim of innocence. The papers Miss Cross was carrying, could you see what they were? No, it was too dark, and she was moving too quickly. Lady Cordelia hesitated, then added, but they looked official somehow. Legal documents, perhaps. Or letters. Letters. Poirot's mind returned to the writing desk in Lord Blackwood's room, where he had found the cryptic note about Cambridge. Had there been other documents, other secrets that someone had removed before his investigation began? One more question, Lady Cordelia. Lord Blackwood's note, the one asking you to come to his room. What did it say exactly? She reached into the bodice of her dress and produced a folded piece of paper, yellowed with handling. I have kept it with me since that night. I do not know why. Poirot took the note and read it by the dim light of the conservatory lamps. My darling C, come to me at midnight. I have discovered something extraordinary, a secret that will shock you to your core. But fear not. When you hear what I have to tell you, you will understand why everything must change. Yours in anticipation, Charles. He knew something, Poirot murmured. Something he intended to reveal that night. But what? He never told me. He never had the chance. Poirot pocketed the note and bowed slightly. Thank you, Lady Cordelia. You have been most helpful. He left her alone among the orchids, a beautiful woman drowning in secrets and sorrow. But as he walked through the darkened corridors toward his room, his mind was focused on a single question. What had Evangeline Cross taken from Lord Blackwood's room? Chapter 10. The Hidden Will. The clock in the hallway struck midnight as Poirot sat alone in his room, the pieces of the puzzle spread before him like a game of solitaire that refused to be won. Upon the writing desk lay his notes, names, motives, alibis, and contradictions, all woven together in a tapestry of lies and half-truths. Dr. Edmund Graves, bound by an ancient crime. Elena Vasquez, seeking revenge for her sister's death. Evangeline Cross, desperate for recognition and inheritance. Sir Reginald Hartley, consumed by jealousy. Lady Cordelia, trapped in a web of passion and deceit. And Victor Ashworth, drowning in gambling debts, his promissory notes held by the dead man himself. Victor. Poirot frowned, stroking his mustache with sudden intensity. He had not yet spoken to the young man, an oversight that now seemed glaring in its significance. But first, there was the matter of Evangeline Cross and the papers she had taken from Lord Blackwood's room. Poirot rose from his chair with new-found purpose. The hour was late, but some revelations could not wait for morning. He gathered his dressing gown around himself and stepped into the corridor, moving with the silent grace of a cat stalking its prey. The villa was quiet, wrapped in shadows and secrets. Candles flickered in their sconces, casting dancing patterns upon the walls. Somewhere, a floorboard creaked, the ancient house settling into sleep, but otherwise, nothing stirred. Evangeline's room was at the far end of the east wing. Poirot approached her door and paused, listening. A faint light glowed beneath the threshold, and from within came the sound of muffled weeping. He knocked softly. The weeping stopped abruptly, replaced by the rustle of movement and the scrape of a drawer being hastily closed. "Who is it?" Her voice was thin, frightened. "Hercule Poirot, mademoiselle. I must speak with you. It is a matter of great urgency." A long pause. Then the click of a lock, and the door opened just wide enough to reveal Evangeline's face. Her eyes were red and swollen, her golden hair disheveled, and she clutched her dressing gown around herself as though it were armor against the world. "It's the middle of the night. Monsieur Poirot." "I am aware of the hour, mademoiselle, but murder does not keep civilized hours, and neither must those who seek to uncover it." He met her gaze with quiet intensity. "You lied to me this morning. You were not in your room on the night Lord Blackwood died. You were in his room, and you took something, papers of some kind. I must know what they were." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of denying everything. Then, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and she stepped aside to let him enter. The room was modest by the villa's standards. A single bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk by the window. But Poirot's keen eyes immediately noticed the drawer that had been hastily closed upon his arrival. Something protruded from its edge, the corner of an envelope, thick and cream-colored. "May I?" He gestured toward the desk. Evangeline nodded, sinking onto the edge of her bed like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "You might as well see it. Everyone will know soon enough." Poirot opened the drawer and withdrew its contents, a sheaf of legal documents bound with red ribbon, and a sealed envelope bearing the name of a London solicitor. He examined the papers with growing interest, his eyebrows rising as he absorbed their significance. "A will," he murmured. "Lord Blackwood's last will and testament. He gave it to me that night, just hours before he died." Evangeline's voice was hollow, empty of everything but exhaustion. "He called me to his room around 11 o'clock. He said he had finally decided to acknowledge me as his daughter. Publicly, legally. He had drawn up a new will, leaving me half of his estate." "Half?" "The other half was to go to another party, someone he called his debt to the past." I did not understand what he meant. Poirot turned to the final page of the will, where the beneficiaries were listed in precise legal language. His eyes widened as he read the second name. "Elena Vasquez," he breathed, "also known as Countess Vera Dobrova. I don't know who that is. Lord Blackwood, my father, said only that he had wronged this person terribly, and that he wished to make amends." Evangeline shook her head in confusion. Why would he leave half his fortune to a stranger? "Because she is not a stranger, mademoiselle. She is the woman whose sister he killed 40 years ago in Cambridge." Poirot set down the will, his mind racing with new possibilities. Lord Blackwood was dying. His conscience, it was awakening after years of slumber. He wished to set things right, to acknowledge his illegitimate daughter, to compensate the woman he had wronged, to confess his crimes before meeting his Maker. But someone stopped him. Precisely, someone who could not allow these revelations to come to light. Poirot began to pace, his patent leather slippers making soft sounds upon the carpet. "The question is, who? This will benefit you and Countess Dobrova. It does not benefit Dr. Graves, whose secret would still be exposed. It does not benefit Sir Reginald, whose wife's affair would become public knowledge. And it does not benefit—" He stopped suddenly, a new thought striking him with the force of revelation. "Mademoiselle, when you left Lord Blackwood's room that night, did you see anyone in the corridor?" "I thought I saw a shadow near the servants' staircase, but I was frightened, and I was not paying attention." She paused, her brow furrowing with effort. "Wait, there was something else. A smell, tobacco smoke. Very distinctive, like expensive cigars." "Cigars?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden understanding. "Tell me, mademoiselle, who among the guests at Villa Marguerite smokes cigars?" "Only one person that I know of, Victor Ashworth." The pieces of the puzzle snapped together with terrible clarity. Victor Ashworth, Lady Pemberton's nephew and heir. Victor, who owed substantial gambling debts to Lord Blackwood. Victor, who stood to inherit his aunt's fortune, but only if no other claims arose to challenge his position. "The promissory notes," Poirot muttered. "Lord Blackwood held Victor's gambling debts. But more importantly, mademoiselle, you are Lady Pemberton's blood relation through Lord Blackwood. If your existence became known, if you were acknowledged as his daughter, you might have a claim upon the family fortune." Evangeline stared at him with dawning horror. "You think Victor killed my father to protect his inheritance?" "I think Victor had much to lose and everything to gain from Lord Blackwood's death." Poirot gathered up the will and the documents, tucking them carefully into his dressing gown. "These papers must be secured, and tomorrow I shall have a conversation with young Mr. Ashworth that he will not soon forget." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand upon the handle. "One more question, mademoiselle. When Lord Blackwood gave you these documents, did he seem afraid?" Evangeline considered this carefully. "Not afraid, exactly, but he kept glancing toward the door, as though he expected someone to interrupt us, and he made me promise to keep the will hidden until he could make a public announcement the next morning." An announcement that never came. "No." Her voice broke with fresh grief. "Because someone made sure he would never speak again." Poirot left her room and walked slowly back through the darkened corridors, his mind heavy with the weight of approaching justice. Tomorrow, he would confront Victor Ashworth. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come to light. But as he passed the library door, He noticed that it stood slightly ajar, and a thin line of light spilled into the hallway. Someone was awake, someone who perhaps had secrets of their own to guard. He pushed the door open silently and peered inside. Victor Ashworth sat at the desk, his head in his hands, surrounded by scattered papers and empty glasses. Before him lay a letter that seemed to have shattered whatever remained of his composure. And clutched in his trembling fingers was a small revolver, its barrel glinting in the lamplight. "Mr. Ashworth," Poirot said quietly, "I think it is time we talked." Chapter 11. The Final Revelation. The revolver trembled in Victor Ashworth's hand as he looked up at Poirot with eyes that held nothing but despair. The library was thick with cigarette smoke and the sour smell of whiskey, and scattered papers covered the desk like fallen leaves after a storm. "Monsieur Poirot." His voice was hoarse, broken. "You should not have come here." "On the contrary, Mr. Ashworth, I believe I have arrived at precisely the right moment." Poirot stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. "The revolver, if you please. Violence solves nothing, and dead men cannot make confessions." For a long moment, Victor stared at the weapon in his hand as though he had forgotten it was there. Then, with a shuddering sigh, he laid it upon the desk and pushed it toward Poirot. "I wasn't going to use it on you," he said quietly. "I was going to use it on myself. That would be most foolish, and quite unnecessary." Poirot picked up the revolver and slipped it into his pocket. "Tell me, Mr. Ashworth, what has driven you to such desperation?" Victor gestured toward the letter that lay before him. "This arrived today from my solicitor in London. Lord Blackwood's estate is being settled, and it seems he made a new will shortly before his death. A will that leaves half his fortune to some American girl and the other half to a Russian countess." He laughed bitterly. "I am left with nothing but my debts and my aunt's disappointment." "You knew about the will?" "I suspected. Blackwood taunted me with it the night he died. He said that everything was about to change, that certain people would soon learn their true place in the world." Victor's hands clenched into fists. "I thought he meant to expose my gambling debts to my aunt. I had no idea he was planning something far worse." Poirot studied the young man with penetrating intensity. "Where were you at midnight on the night Lord Blackwood died?" "In my room, drinking and feeling sorry for myself, as usual." Victor met his gaze without flinching. "I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to, but I lacked the courage. I have always lacked courage. It is my greatest failing. And yet someone saw you near the servants' staircase that night. Someone smelled your cigar smoke in the corridor." Victor frowned in confusion. "That's impossible. I never left my room after dinner. I swear it on my mother's grave." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Something in Victor's manner spoke of truth. The truth of a weak man, perhaps, but truth nonetheless. And if Victor had not been in the corridor that night, then who had been smoking his distinctive cigars? "Your cigars, Mr. Ashworth. Where do you keep them?" "In a case in my room. They are Cuban, very expensive. My one remaining luxury." "And could anyone have taken one without your knowledge?" Victor considered this, his brow furrowing. "I suppose so. My room is never locked. But who would—" He stopped suddenly, a terrible realization dawning in his eyes. "Oh, God, you don't think—" But Poirot was already moving toward the door. "Come with me, Mr. Ashworth. It is time to gather everyone together. The hour of truth has arrived." The drawing room of Villa Marguerite had never felt smaller than it did at that moment. Lady Pemberton sat rigid in her usual chair, her face pale as marble. Dr. Graves stood by the fireplace, his thin frame casting a long shadow across the carpet. Elena Vasquez, Countess Dobrova, occupied the chaise longue, her icy composure showing the first cracks of anxiety. Sir Reginald and Lady Cordelia sat together for once, united by confusion and fear. Evangeline Cross perched on the edge of a settee, clutching the will that would change her life. And Victor Ashworth leaned against the wall, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Poirot stood in the center of the room, commanding their attention, as a conductor commands an orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have asked you here tonight because a man is dead, and his killer sits among us. For 3 days, I have listened to your stories, examined your secrets, and followed the twisted paths of your lies. Now, at last, I am ready to reveal the truth." He began to pace, his patent leather shoes clicking softly upon the floor. Lord Blackwood was not a good man. He was a seducer, a deceiver, and, as we have learned, a killer. 40 years ago, in Cambridge, he caused the death of a young woman named Maria Vasquez and buried her body in a college garden. He abandoned his pregnant mistress in America and never acknowledged the daughter she bore him. He conducted an affair with another man's wife and held gambling debts over the head of his hostess's nephew. He paused, letting his words settle upon the assembled guests like dust upon a tomb. "Any one of you might have wished him dead. Dr. Graves feared the exposure of his complicity in Maria's death. Countess Dobrova, or should I say, Señorita Elena Vasquez, sought revenge for her sister's murder. Miss Cross desired recognition and inheritance. Sir Reginald burned with jealousy over his wife's infidelity. Lady Cordelia feared the scandal that would destroy her reputation. And Mr. Ashworth saw his financial ruin approaching with every passing day." "Then who did it?" Sir Reginald demanded impatiently. "Stop playing games and tell us." "A man." Poirot smiled thinly. "Patience, Sir Reginald. The truth, she must be approached with respect." He turned to face Lady Pemberton, who had remained silent throughout his recitation. Her hands were folded in her lap with perfect composure, but Poirot noticed that her knuckles had turned white with tension. "Let us consider the evidence. On the night of the murder, several people were seen in the corridor near Lord Blackwood's room. Countess Dobrova went there at midnight, but found the door already ajar and heard voices inside. Lady Cordelia arrived shortly after and found the room empty, the French doors open. Miss Cross was seen leaving the room earlier, carrying papers that we now know to be Lord Blackwood's will." "But the smell of cigar smoke," Evangeline interrupted. "I told you, I smelled Victor's cigars." "Indeed you did, mademoiselle. But Mr. Ashworth claims he never left his room that night, so we must ask ourselves, who else might have had access to his cigars? Who else might have wished to cast suspicion upon him?" Poirot's gaze settled upon Lady Pemberton with terrible intensity. "Someone who knew the layout of this house intimately, someone who could move through its corridors unseen, using the servants' passages and hidden stairways. Someone who had invited all these guests here for a purpose, not to celebrate the spring, but to create a gallery of suspects among whom the true killer might hide." Lady Pemberton's composure finally cracked. "This is outrageous. I invited you here to solve this crime, not to accuse me of committing it." But that is precisely why you invited me, madame, to provide the final piece of your elaborate puzzle. Poirot shook his head slowly. You are clever. I grant you that. You gathered together everyone who had reason to hate Lord Blackwood, knowing that suspicion would fall upon them. You stole one of your nephew's cigars to leave a false trail, and you pushed Lord Blackwood from his balcony, confident that his many enemies would provide you with cover. But why? Victor stepped forward, his face twisted with confusion. Aunt Margaret, why would you want Blackwood dead? Poirot answered for her. Because Lord Blackwood knew her secret, a secret that she has kept hidden for nearly 40 years. Is that not so, madame? Lady Pemberton said nothing. Her face had become a mask of stone, her eyes burning with cold fury. You see, ladies and gentlemen, there was another person in Cambridge in 1899, another witness to Maria Vasquez's death, a young English girl who was walking in the garden that night and saw everything, the struggle, the fall, the hasty burial. Poirot paused dramatically. That girl was Margaret Pemberton, then Margaret Ashworth, before her marriage. A collective gasp rippled through the room. She saw Blackwood and Graves bury the body, and she used that knowledge to her advantage. For 40 years, she has been blackmailing Lord Blackwood, extracting money, favors, and social connections. Her fortune, her position, her influence, all of it built upon a foundation of silence and extortion. You cannot prove this, Lady Pemberton hissed. But I can, madame, because Lord Blackwood kept records, meticulous records of every payment he made to you over the years. Poirot produced a leather notebook from his pocket. I found this hidden in the lining of his traveling trunk. It documents 40 years of blackmail, including the substantial sum he paid you just last month. Lady Pemberton's face contorted with rage. He was going to expose me. He told me that night that he was dying, that he intended to confess everything before he met his Maker. He was going to tell the world what I had done, how I had profited from my silence, while a murdered girl rotted in an unmarked grave. And so you killed him. I had no choice. She rose from her chair, trembling with fury. Everything I have built, my reputation, my position, my family's honor, would have been destroyed. I could not let that happen. I would not. The room fell silent. Lady Pemberton stood alone in the center of the gathering, exposed at last, her carefully constructed facade crumbling around her. You oiled the railing of his balcony, Poirot continued quietly. You went to his room that night after Miss Cross had left, and you confronted him. When he refused to change his mind, you pushed him over the edge. It was quick, efficient, and almost perfect. Almost. What gave me away? The cigar, madame? You thought to implicate your nephew, but you made one small mistake. Victor's cigars are Cuban, dark and pungent, but the ash I found on the balcony was from a different blend entirely. A lighter tobacco, the kind smoked by those who do not truly enjoy cigars, but merely use them as props. Poirot smiled grimly. Well, you took one of Victor's cigars, but could not bring yourself to smoke it properly. The ash betrayed you. Lady Pemberton laughed, a hollow, terrible sound. Undone by ash. How fitting. Margaret. Victor's voice was thick with emotion. How could you? I trusted you. I loved you like a mother. And I protected you like a son. Everything I did for this family, for our name, our legacy. She looked around the room at the faces of her guests, her expression hardening into contempt. You think you are better than me? You, with your affairs and your secrets and your pathetic little scandals? I merely did what any of you would have done in my place. No, madame. Poirot's voice was firm. What you did was murder, and now you must answer for it. The police arrived an hour later, summoned by telephone from Monte Carlo. Lady Pemberton went quietly, her dignity intact even in defeat. She did not look back as they led her away, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight, her head held high. The remaining guests dispersed slowly, each carrying their own burden of secrets and sorrows. Dr. Graves announced his intention to return to England and confess his role in Maria Vasquez's death to the authorities. Elena, for she had abandoned her countess disguise, spoke of returning to Spain, to the village where her sister had been born. Sir Reginald and Lady Cordelia left together, their futures uncertain, but their bond somehow strengthened by the ordeal. And Evangeline Cross remained at Villa Marguerite, the new mistress of half a fortune, contemplating a future she had never dared to imagine. And Victor Ashworth found Poirot on the terrace as dawn broke over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "What will happen to her?" he asked quietly. "She will stand trial for murder. The evidence is conclusive." Poirot gazed out at the glittering sea, his expression thoughtful. "But perhaps there will be mercy. She is old, and the crime she witnessed in Cambridge was not of her making. She was like a mother to me. I know, and that makes her betrayal all the more painful." Poirot turned to face the young man, his green eyes gentle. "But you are free now, Mr. Ashworth, free of debt, free of secrets, free of the shadow that has hung over this family for 40 years. What you do with that freedom is up to you." Victor nodded slowly, his gaze fixed upon the rising sun. "I think I shall start again, somewhere far from here, far from memories and ghosts." A wise decision. Poirot adjusted his hat and picked up his valise. "And now I must take my leave. The train to Paris departs in 2 hours, and Hercule Poirot does not miss trains." He walked away across the terrace, his small figure silhouetted against the morning light. Behind him, Villa Marguerite stood silent and empty, its secrets finally laid bare, its shadows dispersed by the dawn. The death in Monte Carlo had been solved. Justice, imperfect but inevitable, would be served. And somewhere, in a forgotten garden in Cambridge, a young woman named Maria Vasquez could finally rest in peace. The end. The truth, it is like the sun. One cannot look at it directly, but without it, one cannot see anything else. Hercule Poirot,